Hi, my name is Reagan Bernhard, and our project investigated the neural instantiation of spontaneous counterfactual thought. Past work has shown that counterfactual thought may play a critical role in many of the judgments we make, including whether an agent was forced or acted freely, whether their actions were causal, whether they acted intentionally, or whether they did something versus merely allowed it to happen. Prior neuroimaging work has identified a set of brain regions recruited by explicit episodic counterfactual simulation. But the kind of counterfactual thought that's important for many of our judgments isn't explicit and episodic, but rather might be spontaneous and even closer to automatic or implicit thought. Therefore, we are interested in investigating how this spontaneous counterfactual thought was instantiated in the brain. To do this, we leverage the fact that individuals seem to consider alternatives when judging whether an agent was forced or acted freely. In particular, we're more likely to perceive an agent as forced when there was no good potential alternative action the agent could have taken instead. We created a scenario where participants were told that there was a game show where contestants had to survive on a desert island for a month with only the contents of a survival pack. Every survival pack initially contained 3 items, but the contestants had to reject 1 item from the pack, leaving it behind, and keep only 2 items to bring onto the island. Critically, contestants always rejected a low-value item, something that wouldn't be useful on the desert island. However, in one condition, there was a normal alternative action the contestant could have taken instead, because there was another low-value item in the pack. In another condition, again, the contestant rejected a low-value item, but there was no normal alternative action. All of the other possible actions the contestants could have taken involved rejecting useful items. In the first case, we expect that participants will view the contestant as acting freely. So for example, in this case, they might say that Caitlin was forced to reject the ring or was not forced to reject the ring because she could have rejected the stuffed animal instead. But in this case, they might say that Diego was forced to reject the nail polish because there was really nothing else he could have done instead. We found that across different variations of this task, participants were much more likely to agree that the contestant was forced when all of the alternative actions, possible alternative actions were abnormal than when there was one normal alternative action the contestant could have taken. Importantly, the quality of the alternative actions only mattered when participants were asked to make forced judgments, judge how strongly they agreed that the agent had to take the action they did, but not when they were making judgments about what the contestant actually did. We found that when participants were asked to consider what contestants had to do compared to what contestants actually did, they consistently recruited a network of 14 brain regions that's surprisingly similar to those past research has shown are recruited when we engage in explicit episodic counterfactual simulation. We then wanted to know if this network of brain regions carried information about the content of these counterfactual alternatives. To test this, we took advantage of the fact that despite the fact that on average, participants were more likely to say contestants were forced when there was no normal alternative, there was a lot of variability among participants. Some participants' forced judgments were strongly affected by the alternative possibilities, whereas others didn't seem to take the quality of the alternatives into account at all. For every participant, we were able to create a measure of how much they thought about the relevant or thought about counterfactual alternatives when making their judgments, basically by finding the difference in height between these green bars and orange bars. We then trained a pattern classifier to identify the relevant counterfactual item, the thing the contestant could have reasonably done instead, on each trial in each of our 14 ROIs, creating 14 classification accuracies for each participant. We found that classification accuracy in these regions significantly predicted participants' difference score. In other words, the better we could decode the identity of the relevant counterfactual when participants were making forced judgments, the more they took the value or normality of that counterfactual action into account when making their judgments. And this was true only for that relevant counterfactual item, the thing or the normal alternative action, the thing the contestant could have reasonably done instead, but not true for the abnormal counterfactual action, and not true when participants were judging what the contestant actually did. So in sum, I think that we've successfully identified a network of brain regions that reliably encodes the content of spontaneous counterfactual thought. And we've done this when the counterfactual thinking occurred spontaneously rather than being elicited explicitly. And importantly, we were able to do this, but even when holding fixed the content of the actual action, even when holding fixed what the agent actually did, merely by manipulating the value of the alternatives. Thank you very much. And I'd like to thank our funders, the Harvard Brain Sciences Initiative, the summer seminars in neuroscience philosophy, Mind, Brain, and Behavior at Harvard, and thank you.